I'm wearing my, I assume I'm more casually dressed. That's the hair's up. That's what I interpreted it as, Bill.
Yes,
that
it is.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Aw. Yeah. Tell me you're not
Thank you, Kayla, and good morning, and welcome to Faith for Living on this lovely Wednesday morning. If you're able to breathe in the humidity, then you're doing better than I am. Anyway, well, it's great to see everybody here this morning. I want to begin with a couple of announcements. First of all, yesterday we ran out of the forms for people to get the recordings, and so there's new ones back there today on the back table, and you can get the recordings. There's the Sunday, and then all four weekday sessions with Reverend Marianne McKibben Dana, and there's $10, and you can take your money and the order form over to the administration building. And then it is Wednesday, and it looks there always it's been raining on Wednesday this year, this summer. So it's supposed to be over with and nice and sunny by time for the picnic. We're going to count on that, but I want to mention the picnic tonight at 5:30, and that's for a free will donation, hot dogs, macaroni salad, baked beans, cookies, lemonade, watermelon, all those things. A great picnic and a great atmosphere. And John Wilkie always has games for the children following that. And well, we're all invited to do the games, but most of us, after a couple of hot dogs, don't participate. But anyway, we'll leave that up to you. Let me also mention, by way of promotion, actually, that in 2 weeks, July 31st and August 1st, we have a seminar by John Fox, who is a certified poetic therapist, and he will be with us to have the topic Exploring Epiphany Through Poetry and Poem Making. And this is a joint seminar with our wellness group and also with Religious Life. And it is an extra charge program, and I'm eager for you to sign up for that. There are also flyers about that on the back table. We do need your registration ahead of time, and you'll be given materials for that seminar. So note that, please. I would also note that we have, as I've mentioned before, we have Reverend Jim Wallace coming next week, and his book, The False White Gospel, is over at the Fine Print Bookstore, where you can also order Mary Ann's books, who are now sold out. So with that, would you give a warm welcome this morning to Reverend Mary Ann McKibben-Dana from Reston, Virginia.
Good morning. Wednesday. It's good to see you all here. We are talking about the body today, the idea that hope lives in these fleshy, imperfect, flawed, beautiful bodies of ours. Hope is not just a category that lives in our heads, but we live it out. And as people of faith who seek to follow Jesus, we do that in a particular way because we affirm that God became flesh. God entered the human experience. And so that is the tenor and the focus of our work as we seek to be people who try to live out hope in the flesh. And so as we do that, I want to lead us in a little body prayer, and I invite you to stand in body or spirit as you feel able this morning. What you will do is simply watch and listen to what I say and then just repeat it. And I'm dealing with some physical therapy in my shoulder right now, so I'm very sensitive to you doing this in a way that feels comfortable to you, right? So, and if you're right next to somebody, you might spread out just ever so slightly so you don't whack them accidentally in our prayer. So let us pray to God together. Thank you, God, for this day. For all that is above me. For all that is below me. For all that is behind me. Ooh, I can feel that. For all that is in front of me. For all that is around me. For all that is within me. Thank you, God, for this day. Amen. You may be seated. I wonder if anyone in this room is responsible for this wonderful marker along the lake trail. I spotted it a couple of days ago and said that is a lot of the work that we're doing this week, right? We plant the seeds. We do what we feel that God is calling us to do. We live as if we have hope. Sometimes we need to live as if to work our way into that sense of hopefulness, trusting that God will bring the harvest. I have to tell you that this week, I'm a brand new gardener. I started last year. We live, Reston is kind of there are houses, but we live in a townhome there, and we have a community garden plot that I finally got a hold of last year after being on the waiting list for 18 months. And so my husband, Robert, is doing the daily tending, the July tending, and he's sending me pictures. We got a bumper crop of carrots this morning. Yesterday it was tomatoes. The squash vine borer is destroyed, the zucchini and the squash. I was paying so much attention to the bugs, the squash bugs, I wasn't looking at the roots. There's probably a sermon in there somewhere, right? There was something going on under the surface that I wasn't paying attention to. But that reminder of the cyclical nature of things, and that it's a mixed bag. I think Robert feels bad. He's like, we discovered this squash vine borer while I was away, and so he feels kind of responsible. I said, it's not your fault. He's feeling really bad about it. And I said, but hey, we've got a bumper crop of potatoes. The tomatoes look great. It's a mixed bag, isn't it? And that's life, right? We take the good with the not so good, and we roll with it. And that's what today is about. So we're going to, whoops, hang on. Let me put this over here. Keep losing my cursor. There we go. So we've started each morning with poetry, and as I think about how, today and tomorrow we're moving into some more practical areas, and how do we cultivate hope in some really specific, practical, embodied kind of ways. And one of the ways a lot of us do that is going into nature. One of the most renewing and restoring practices that we can do as embodied creatures is to get out into the creatureliness of this world. And I cannot think of a better poem to embody that than this wonderful gem from Wendell Berry that has been put to animation. It's called The Peace of Wild Things. And so let's share in that together.
The peace of wild things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
I'm feeling led to add to the poem here. I'm curious, as I was listening to it this time, I can't remember who it was yesterday that when we were talking about the different kinds of literature, someone was mapping that onto past, present, and future. I don't know if you're here today, but I heard those echoes in that poem too. He mentions forethought and the worry about the future, and the practice of being in nature calls him back to the present. And I think that as I worked on what it means to have hope, hope so much is focused on the future. Again, as I said yesterday, how can hope also be a present-based experience, right? So let's add to the poem a little bit. Wendell Berry goes and visits the wood drake and lies down in the grass. But let's just popcorn up here. When despair for the world grows in you, in us, and we worry about what our children's, either our actual children or future generations will experience, where do you go? What do you do? And just call it out, and I'll repeat so we have it on the microphone for the recording. Where do you go? What do you do? Prayer. Lake Erie. What is it? Forest. The beach. That constant, but not regular but irregular crashing of the surf. If you're talking about an ocean beach, maybe you're talking about a lake beach. Well, that sometimes has some tied to it. Where else and what else? Yes? Music. Is there a particular piece? Do you have a go-to? No. Religious music, sacred music, yes. Where else do you go and lie down? Yes. Pulling out the paints. Yeah. Jazz, that freedom within a form. Yeah, beautiful. What? Reading, literature. You've heard the studies that people who read fiction are more empathetic. Fiction grows empathy within us. Yeah. What is it? Painting. We have another painter. Let's get the two of you together. Yes, good. Friends, community. What I'm struck by is how much of this is embodied work, right? We don't just kind of sit and think. We go somewhere. We pick up a book. We pick up the paints. We walk along the shoreline. We go swimming, right? And I think that's how our hope comes back to us. So we're going to talk a little bit today and tomorrow about how that happens. And as I was researching kind of the psychology of hope, one of the primary thinkers that I kept running into is Charles Rick Snyder, a psychologist. And I was amazing at this Bible study on Monday. I was just talking to, do you all know John Porcari? So we were talking afterward, and he was very interested in this topic of hope, and we were chatting with one another, and he said, "Are you familiar with Dr. Snyder's work?" I said, "I have a slide on Wednesday about Dr. Snyder, yes." And his formulation is that hope is built with three kinds of thinking, three kinds of mental and physical work, because it's about what we do with these things. But we need three basic components to build a sense of hope. The first, and we'll start at the bottom of this list, is goal. We have to have an idea of where we want to go. And we have to be able to kind of imagine an end point, something that we have in mind that we want to achieve. And then two kinds of thinking feed into that goal work. The first is what he calls pathway thinking. And then the next is what he calls agency thinking. And the basic idea behind that is pathway is we can imagine a lot of different ways to get to where we want to go. So if I want to train for a marathon, I can think of a lot of different ways to do that. I need to get good shoes. I need to maybe hire a coach, or if I can't afford a coach, maybe I barter with someone, or I look for a plan on the internet. I set aside time in my schedule so that I can do the training. I maybe read a little bit on what's involved in that kind of endeavor. Do you see that, what I'm doing? I'm looking at different pathways, right? I need to figure out what on my schedule needs to be thrown overboard for several months to make time, all of this. That's pathway thinking. Agency thinking is a belief in oneself that this can happen, that I have the ability to do this, all right? So if I hit a snag, if I hit a roadblock, I have the ability to get around it. So if something happens and I get sick for a couple of weeks, I can't train, I can get myself back on track. And we need, according to Snyder, all three of these things to have. These are the psychological building blocks for hope. And so I was talking to John about this at the Monday Bible study, and he said, can I share with you some work that I have done around this exact concept? He's even built on it in some ways that I think are really powerful and very kind of spirit-based. And so he sent me his slide, and I'm sharing this with you with all credit to John Porcari. But here's how he parses this into building a sense of hope. So if you look in the upper left, you have why power, right? That's the goal part. Having a clear and compelling desired outcome, where we want to get to. If you look in the lower right, that's the pathway thinking, the way power. Finding realistic and flexible pathways to reach greater goals and desired outcomes. And let me just say, as kind of a parenthetical, we're going to talk in a minute about some of the learnings that our family went through as we were helping not just our firstborn, but our kids in general manage being in a world that is full of things that pull on us, make us anxious, can knock us off our game. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But one of the things I will never forget, my husband and I were taking a class on how to help kids manage anxiety. Very anxious world. So how do we do that? And one of the things that I remember she showed us two pictures, the psychologist, Monique Reynolds is her name. And the first picture was a person walking on a log bridge across a raging river. And they're kind of walking like this. And you can tell it's like one false step, you're going to fall into the rapids. And she says, a lot of us have internalized when we raise our kids that this is the kind of way to think about our kids growing up. Like, we need to keep them on the path. There's a lot of things that threaten them, and we just need to keep them moving in the right direction. And let's not make any false steps because we're going to lead to disaster, right? But parenting is really like, and she showed us another picture, which was this open vista with 3 or 4 paths going off into several directions. And I will never forget the experience of seeing that, because when you deal with kids who have had challenges, and many of us have kids who've had challenges, we think, oh gosh, they've stepped off the path, and that's it. It's over, right? But if we think about life as much more open-ended, with lots of different paths, that we can trust that God is with us in those paths, meandering though they may be, full of perils they may be, and yet that sense of trust is a way of kind of lowering the temperature on the anxiety of, my kid is going through this profound crisis and is never going to be okay again, right? That kind of, we're on the log bridge and we better keep hunkered down. I mean, you can even see it in the posture of the person in the photo, because they're like this. This is not a hopeful posture. This is somebody white-knuckling it and hoping that everything's going to be okay, right? So when we think about way power, that lower right thing, that's the pathway thinking. Pathway doesn't mean we find the one, point A to point B and get there. We imagine, we're going to have squash vine borers in our garden. But look over here, we're also growing, sweet potatoes, and they're down under the ground, and we don't know what they're going to do. So thinking about that in a more open-ended way. I'm sure I shared this with you 5 years ago, but there's a lot of overlap between pathway thinking and improvisation, and the idea that when your kind of plan A doesn't pan out, that you can always find a plan B. There's always another choice to make. There's always another option. And believing that and acting as if that is true is a powerful, hope-filled way to live. Anyway, moving along through this. So if we go to the upper right, we have willpower. That's agency thinking, right? Being internally, am I hearing music? Okay, somebody's phone maybe. Thought God was talking to me personally here for a minute. Willpower, that's agency thinking, right? Internally motivated, we can do this, we can take those paths, take those steps. If we hit a roadblock, we can pivot. Anybody tired of the word pivot after the last 4 years of COVID? But that's what we did for 4 years is pivot in COVID. But here's the piece that I really love, and it speaks to John's, this is his addition, and it speaks to his faith background, is the we power, that we don't do this alone, right? And that's part of, as we were talking on Monday, I realized, as valuable as this is, it's very individualistic, right? And it's very kind of, I can do this. It doesn't have the faith component that we want to bring to this. And this, John works with businesses, and so he keeps a light touch with the spiritual stuff. But the we power speaks to, sometimes I don't have hope, but I sit with people, and I encounter people, and I am in the presence of people that help me move forward. All right? So as we think about the next couple of days, and as I share some of what I'm going to offer to you by way of practice, let's also keep the we power in mind. And I'm also aware, I'm in a phase of my life. I mentioned Richard Rohr the last 2 days, actually. We're going 3 for 3 today. But his classic book, Falling Upward, which is about that spirituality of the second half of life, right? And it's really interesting. I wrote the book, I guess I was pre-age 50, but not much. I mean, I was staring down the barrel of 50. And now that I'm on the other side of it, there's a lot of good practice in there. I mean, there's a whole section of the book that's the practice of hope, and it's like, here are some concrete things you can do. You can, implement, right? And I wish I had put a little more in there, that sometimes the answer is to do less. And I am finding that more and more, that sometimes the answer is simply to step back. Like Wendell Berry, lie down into the rushes and let the wood drake minister to us, right? I suspect in this crowd I don't need to hammer that home too well, because that's probably a lesson that many of you have learned, is perhaps the answer is simply to let go and let God, as they say in 12-step. So that's a little parentheses on that. Here's the other little piece I want to share with you. I mentioned this work that we did to help our kids, all of whom have had struggles with anxiety. And if that is something that hasn't touched your family or extended network, I would say that's probably an unusual experience in our world. I contend, and I'm not alone in this, and it's not an original thought on my part, that we live in a culture, we live in a media environment, we live in a social media landscape that has us in a state, if we let ourselves be, of perpetual activation, or constant, or regular ongoing. And that role of the nervous system in keeping us in a state of panic, in a state of despair, in a state of discouragement. And it's very hard to have this when we can't imagine a pathway out of it. How on earth are we going to get through this? And so as much as I appreciate Snyder's work, I also want to critique it a little bit and say it's maybe easier for those of us who have a certain level of financial security, who are at the top of the kind of cultural food chain, if you will, whose needs are essentially met, more or less. We all have difficulties and challenges. But it's much easier to have pathway and agency thinking if we have that set of advantages already with us, right? So we need to bracket that kind of as helpful as I think that is. So what I want to share with you is a little model, a little way of thinking about our nervous systems and the ways that we get, when I say activated, do you all know what I mean by that? The kind of stressed and unable to kind of think expansively and productively because we're so anxious in the moment. And how many of you, are any of you familiar with the idea of flipping your lid? Has anybody heard this? I'm seeing a couple of nods. So those who know, just hang with me. And I'm getting into a little bit of Neuroscience 101, which is maybe a dangerous place for a pastor to get into. I know just enough about this to be dangerous, but it was such an aha for me. And I teach it to my clients, coaching clients, the groups that I work with, because I think it's such a powerful thing. It was an aha for me. So I want you to hold up your hand and tuck your thumb into your palm and lower your, Lois is nodding, you know where I'm going with this. Okay, so lower your fingers over it. Dan Siegel is the one who popularized this, what we're calling the hand model of the brain, okay? So imagine that this part of your arm is your spinal cord, your nervous system, those pathways of information that come in through all the nerves of your body, right? Coming in through the spinal cord. And this right here is your frontal cortex. This is the thinking part of the brain. This is the part that allows us to be in an auditorium together where I'm talking and you're absorbing what I'm saying, right? This right in here that's covered up by that cortex is the limbic system. This is the emotional center of the brain. This is the fight or flight part of the brain, right? And so if you keep your hand like this, this is the way when hopefully we're all at a state of somewhat rest. Hopefully I haven't stressed you out too badly. And so maybe we're kind of sitting here in this kind of mindset, right? But when this part of our brain starts to get activated, when it starts to fire, I'm under threat. Something's happening. I don't like this. Somebody just criticized me, or they cut me off on the freeway, or whatever it is, then this part of the brain, especially if this really just keeps going, this part of the brain stops talking to this one. And what they call that is flipping your lid. All right, I'm going to give you a little graphic here, okay? So calm mind is this. Flipped lid is this. And the idea behind this is something you can teach to children. Now here is my aha. And this may be evident to you, but I needed to learn it and kind of realize how important this is. I think anyone who has dealt with a 2- or 3-year-old or 4-year-old understands what a flipped lid looks like. But of course, adults can also flip their lid, right? Now here is what I failed to understand. Our kids are teens and young adults. They're still young, their brains aren't fully formed, but they do have some level of ability to rationally kind of reason things out. And so when my kid flips her lid, their lid, his lid, they're rational. They're on their way to adulthood. I can talk them back into this, right? Because they can reason, they can see pros and cons, they can be comforted, they can think things through. But the thing is, none of us can be talked into this. Teens certainly can't, but adults can't either. If your lid is flipped, the only thing that's going to get your lid back online is getting back into your body. Taking a walk, breathing, calling a friend. Something that has nothing to do with whatever it is that made you go like this. And that was the aha that I had to figure out, is when my kid comes to me and says, I failed this test, I'm not going to get into college, my life is over, all of those things, that catastrophe thinking that teens are so good at. What do I want to do? I want to tell them why that's not true. Are you kidding me? Is one test really? One test is not going to determine the course of your life. They can't hear that when they're like this. I can't hear that when I'm like this. So I mean, I think about session, the session is the council of the Presbyterian Church, like the local group of elders. I think about session meetings I've been in where people are kind of at each other or sort of picking at each other. And what I'm trying to do is kind of talk them back into their better mind. And what we need to do is pray. We need to take a breath, maybe do a little Lectio Divina, read the scripture and get into a completely different brain state. And then when that has happened, then we can address, okay, now you think your life's over because you failed a test. Now we can assess that thought. Does that make sense? So often we want to use our rational mind to try to talk people into their rational mind, and it just doesn't work. And until we calm our nervous systems, until we do that, we cannot think in ways of hope. We cannot access hope because this limbic system is in charge. Okay? So I wanted to introduce that to you, but I think it's even better hearing it from the expert himself. So he gets into a little bit even more of this direction with this, but I think it's important to emphasize the point. So we got one more video, and this is Dan Siegel speaking to a group about how this works.
The upstairs brain can control what's happening in the downstairs.
That's why it's over top of it. Like
That's why it's over top of it. That's right. Yes, that's the reason it's there. It's actually the reason we can all sit in an auditorium like this for 2.5 hours rather than looking for berries or something. So we have this cortex, right? So now what happens is, if this thing is firing enough, this downstairs brain is firing enough, here's what happens. It fires, 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 fires. And pretty soon, it's going to make it so the ability of my upstairs brain to maintain the coordination and balance of the downstairs brain gets a little on the edge. And think of the experience of someone hanging off a cliff, right? You're hanging on, you're still hanging on, you're still hanging on, you're still hanging on, and you can feel yourself shaking. But what happens when you let go?
Yeah, eventually you're...
When you let go, you are going. It's the same way with the upstairs brain. It holds on, it holds on, it holds on, it holds on, and there's a bunch of parents smiling, so you know what's about to happen. This is now let's talk about our brains. It's holding on, it's holding on, it's holding on, and suddenly the firing from the downstairs brain is too much. The grip is lost. And watch what happens. This is why it happens so quickly, you guys. This now no longer is coordinating and balancing it. That's the first thing. So now this is now erupts out because it's no longer contained, which turns this way, way off. So within 2-3 seconds, you go from kind of being a reasonable human being to flipping your lid. Has this happened to any of you? And let me just remind you, just because I know we probably won't talk about it, but it's worth just saying, I'm going to give you the list of the scientific things. We didn't put all this in the book. Oh, actually, we did put this in the book, but not as a list. Here are the 9 functions that this upstairs brain part right here behind your forehead allows you to achieve. Watch what happens if I can help my daughter Maria keep her upstairs brain working well so she's coordinated and balanced. She'll have these 9. But if her downstairs brain is so agitated and I can't help her name it to tame it and I can't connect and then redirect, if I can't do that stuff, she may get really agitated and she may start throwing things and have a big temper tantrum and do all sorts of stuff and like, oh my God, I have a kid with, the dysregulation disorder or something like that. You know? Because it's all about relationships. I mean, there are people with disorders like that for sure, but I always want to ask, what's happening in a relationship first? So here's the 9 functions. Number 1, if she can maintain that, and if I as a parent can maintain it, I can regulate my body. I literally have 2 branches of the nervous system that are the brakes and the accelerator of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches. Anyway, basically it makes my heart rev up, and my lungs breathe faster, and my intestines churn, or it calms all that stuff down. And how you balance the brakes and accelerators is basically how you regulate your body. All happens from here down. The upstairs brain is the master controller of that. So if you lose that function, you can just be totally out of control. That's number one. Number two is the ability to tune into someone else. So at the moment Maria comes home, she's telling me about what happened at school. If I've had a bad day, or I'm really agitated, or I want this to be my perfect daughter, or I was rejected as a kid and I can't stand the feeling that my rejected child's invoking in me because I didn't want to think about my own rejection because I was just fired at work, or I was rejected when I was a kid, or whatever the issue is, and I can't stand it like that, then at that moment, I can't attune to her. This is what this area allows. This area allows you to literally tune into the internal experience of another person. Make a map in your own mind of not only the feelings that another person might be having, and that's called compassion, feeling with, but also to imagine what it's like to be in the mental life of this other person. That's called empathy. So attunement is the gateway to both those things. So it's this balance between rigidity and chaos. This is called...
And that's, again,
that's emotional balance. This is the part of the brain we know from science allows you to achieve that. And this is the part of the brain, this whole talk is about how you develop this in your child. Okay, so that's number three. Number four is called response flexibility. Number four, if you think about this area in Maria's brain, this is the area right here that allows you to take an impulse and put a space between an impulse and an action. Right? It allows you to choose all the different possible responses you have. Think about the various ones and say, you know, I think I'll choose that one. You know the marshmallow experiment? You guys all know that? Some people are not. So let me just remind you. A guy studied, I think it was 2 or 3-year-olds, gave them a marshmallow, said, hey, you know, if you can wait a little bit, I'm going to come back with another marshmallow. You can have 2 of them. And then he left. And then they just filmed the kids. And then he studied them when they're like 25, 30 years of age. The kids who did not eat the marshmallow did better in every aspect of doing better in their lives. Better relationships, better work things, better academic achievement, better everything. Better grades.
Marshmallows are that powerful.
Marshmallows.
That's
because it's important to eat 2 of them. That's it. So what's the deal? They had response flexibility.
Yeah.
They could say, you know something, I'd love to eat this marshmallow, but I think I'll wait.
So already at that age, they had developed
already, because this develops at 18 months of age.
It doesn't stop developing.
Doesn't stop developing until 19 months. But
no,
I'm just kidding.
I think mine is still developing.
Right, it develops throughout the lifespan.
Yeah.
But the idea is it starts developing around 18 months to about 24 to 36 months. Right, so they were studying these kids that had it. It's directly related to attachment experiences. Now, obviously, temperament would also influence that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's response flexibility. Number 5 is the ability to calm fear. Literally, as I mentioned, there are these fibers that go from this upstairs brain down to the downstairs brain, the amygdala, and they squirt inhibitory peptides called GABA is one example. Gamma aminobutyric acid. You don't even know that. Why am I saying it? See, this is I've got so many hats on. Anyway, it squirts a substance to the fear part of the brain that calms it down. That's how you actually overcome fear. You don't actually, it looks like you don't change your downstairs brain, which encoded the fear. You teach your upstairs brain to interpret the context as not finding the downstairs brain response useful, and you tell it to chill out.
And that can come through relationship.
And that comes through relationships.
You will notice that he didn't get to all 9. Let me tell you what the others are real quick. Insight, empathy, morality, and intuition. So I do want to say one thing about the marshmallow experiment, and that is that I've read some critiques of it in more recent years, because if you think about someone whose needs, a child whose needs are basically met, of course they are going to be more likely to be able to wait for a second marshmallow because they trust that that will come. Imagine a child who is food insecure, who lives in a chaotic kind of environment. It is a perfectly rational decision to take that first marshmallow because you don't know if there'll be a second marshmallow, right? And so I do want to nuance that a little bit. And again, you know, I'm speaking to these things as a pastor. There are probably people in this room that can speak even more intelligently about these things who may be study neuroscience or psychology. But you can see why this is an emergency for hope. If a lot of us are letting our downstairs brain, or not even letting, but it turns out that our downstairs brain is kind of driving a lot of our behavior and our response. And I think part of that is something that we can take some responsibility for. I won't ask for a show of hands if you're someone who doom scrolls, but like follows the news. It's so easy to just get sucked into a news vortex, and that just, woo, our amygdala loves it, right? And so how can we cultivate healthier habits so that we can be in our best mind? Because when we're in our best mind, that's where hope can flourish, all right? One more thing before we get to a conversation time. And again, we're getting into some practice here. This is something that I completely just stumbled into during COVID when I was feeling discouraged, feeling a lack of hope, when it was hard to pray, when it was hard to feel like we were ever going to get out of this morass of difficulty. I started to diagnose and realize that I was missing one or more of three basic things. And this isn't rocket surgery, as they say, but this is what I realized that I needed, at least one of these, and maybe even more, is beauty, relationship, and action. And again, I put this slide in the body section of our presentation on Wednesday because I think all of these require something tangible, physical of us. Beauty, you all mentioned walking in nature. We heard Wendell Berry's poem. And there's a lot around the science of awe and wonder right now. Tons of books being written about that, how important that is. But finding a way to access beauty. Relationship, that's that we power that John was talking about on his slide and his exploration of Snyder's work. Calling a friend, it's so simple, and sometimes it was all that was needed to just get back on track. All is not lost. As I love the singer-songwriter Carrie Newcomer, she has a song that says, "The things that have saved us are still here to save us." And for us as people of faith, that is the grace of God. But for people who aren't, love, beauty, fellowship, community, those things are still here. Action, doing one small thing. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But one of those or more of those, and I invite people to borrow my big three or come up with your own. When you're feeling in that kind of cul-de-sac of we're doomed, what helps you move out of it? Going to church, attending your Bible study, reading a devotional book, talking to your pastor, whatever it is. Find your big three or more. So that's what I have as we think about how to embody what hope is about. So let's open it up to some conversation. Would love to use this time, of course, to ask any questions that you have about what we've talked about today, but also, what are your practices? What are your big three? Let's build a toolbox together of how we can cultivate this hopefulness as a people. And our microphones are ready. There's one right back there, yeah.